What is going on, everybody? Welcome into one of my favorite times of the year, reacting to the NFL draft. Before we get started, if you're interested in the how and why behind why I do these draft grades videos, or if you're one of those people in here every year saying, this is stupid, draft grades don't matter, we don't know anything about these players until they step on an NFL field, well, I have my grading criteria and the reasoning behind why I like this exercise on the screen here. If you want to pause and read, or go down to the description down below. While you're down there, if you could do me a huge favor, take just a second to hit that like button. It is a free and easy thing that actually really does support my channel. I appreciate it in advance. But without further ado, let's get started today with the NFC North and the Chicago Bears, going alphabetically here. Just 5 picks for Da Bears to react to here today, starting of course with Caleb Williams. I did break this down in my first round draft grades video, but to summarize some of my points, I am going to give this a certified steal grade, the highest grade I can give. I just think if we're here trying to really determine who stole value from the NFL draft, who manipulated this process to make their football team as good as they can, it doesn't get any better than what the Chicago Bears did. The trade down from number 1 last year that results in not just a right tackle for them last year, but DJ Moore, a superstar wide receiver, a second-round pick next year still, and then, of course, Caleb Williams, who my take on this in my first-round draft grades video was I think we're actually underselling what the hype and expectations should be on Caleb Williams. He, to me, is the type of quarterback prospect that you could debate is a generational type of prospect, but is the level of quarterback prospect that only comes around every 3, 4, 5 years at least. Yet for a large variety of factors, the fact that this own fan base 3 months ago thought Justin Fields was a better option, the fact that last year's 101 pick in Bryce Young was severely disappointing, the fact that the Bears have this long history of not having quarterbacks work out, and the fact that he paints his nails and people don't like that, I think we've actually undersold what the expectations and hype should be here. I really think Caleb Williams is the type of quarterback that will restore the Chicago Bears, not just to relevancy, but to potential greatness and Super Bowl hopes. Maybe not in year 1, but within the first few years on that rookie contract. So really can't do it any better than the Chicago Bears did. I know it was a lock pick at 101 to take Caleb Williams, but when you really look at the full picture, how can you not celebrate how great this pick is for the Chicago Bears, in a very fitting way to kick off our draft grades videos. But then it continues to be great for them. Rome Odunze falls into their lap at 109. Not necessarily that this was some crazy steal in value, but we weren't sure how those top 8 picks were going to play out for the Bears. I think we all knew they would go Rome Odunze if he was there, and they did not hesitate. Makes so much sense. As a wide receiver 3 right away, you just have a loaded pool of talent for Caleb Williams in that wide receiver room all of a sudden. But Keenan Allen's not the long-term answer either, so this is a great long-term play. I actually think there's a lot of similarity in skill sets between Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen, where they're not the most sensational athlete at the wide receiver position, but they win with route running and amazing ball skills, good run after catch ability. So many parallels between those two players. So it'll be a seamless transition and a great mentor for Odunze. Not that he needs a mentor. The dude is a dog, but love that pick for the Bears. Going to go with an A grade. Again, the criteria is in the description below if you want to see a little bit more of why I go A, why I go S, what could be a B, all that stuff. And the system does change as we get to day 3 as well. I do recommend you check it out if you're going to be watching all these videos. It'll make things make a lot more sense. But then in the 3rd round, they take a local kid, Kieran Amagaji, straight out of Hinsdale, Illinois, gets to come home after, just going to Yale. No big deal. But this is a brilliant kid, obviously, goes to frickin' Yale, but also an uber talented, raw offensive tackle prospect. All of the traits in the world, I would say, for the most part, dominated his level of competition, every bit that you want to see if you're going to spend a 3rd round pick on a kid out of the Ivy League. But it is going to be that natural, bump in level of competition, and just his technique in terms of the pad level and varying his hand usage in pass protection. A lot of different things to work on with him, but it's a very nice situation for him to come in and develop played tackle at Yale. I think he could play guard, certainly. So it'll be something to keep an eye on in terms of like where they view him long term. It's not something they're going to have to worry about right now, though. I just don't think he plugs into that offensive line immediately. But I did have a third-round grade on him, and everything checks out for me for the Bears to take him. So I went with an A, killing really the first 2 days of the draft for the Bears. But then you get to day 3. Not a ton of picks here. They go with the punter in the 4th round. I mean, look, there's not a ton of punters that get drafted that I'm actually familiar with, but Torrey Taylor out of Iowa, I actually am familiar with. I've watched a lot of Big Ten football, and Iowa had one of the most anemic, pathetic offenses you'll ever see, to the point that this punter was probably their best offensive player, consistently pinning opponents deep into their territory and helping them win football games. I don't think this is necessarily a horrible pick, but for me, there were really talented interior offensive line prospects that were starting to fall in the draft. This is still a very valuable draft pick here. 2 specific names to keep an eye on here: Hunter Nauerzad, who went to the Chiefs, and Cedric Van Pran, who went to the Bills. Even another guy that'll be backing up in LA for the Rams, Bo Limmer. I just think, you look at that interior offensive line, you have injury questions on Jenkins. They do seem to be trusting Ryan Bates at center. And then Nate Davis, the big free agency signing last year, wasn't exactly great. So I just would have continued to invest in the interior offensive line. And plus, it's just a little cocky for a team that, I don't think their rebuild is complete here. I still think this was a valuable pick to put towards, even if it wasn't interior offensive line, you could put it towards more wide receiver depth, defensive help, of course. So, it's not the end of the world. He's probably going to be a very good punter. But I do think there's a chance they end up regretting not going with some of these other players that could be like starters for them someday. But I do love the Austin Booker pick. This gets a certified steal grade from me as well. What a great landing spot. I mean, the Bears really do need another edge rusher to emerge as a starter opposite of Montez Sweat, who's like a low-end number 1 for them. And for Austin Booker, I did have a 3rd round grade on him. To get him in the 5th after they trade up to get him, I'm totally down to do that. I think it's a great spot where he'll be a part of this rotation early on. He'll get to come in and work on some of his rush moves, get some sacks, get some production. And then when you get into year 2, year 3, I really think he has the talent to emerge as a complementary starter opposite of Montez Sweat as a number 2 edge piece for this defense. Has a bunch of rush moves. He has instincts against the run. It's just a matter of him continuing to add play strength. He's just 21 years old, still filling out his frame, and continuing to get those reps. And I would say developing that pass rush plan and that tool belt where he has the moves. He broke out everything at Kansas and had success with different moves. But it'll be a matter of, game planning for specific matchups in the league, perfecting those moves, and developing some of those counters and when to go to what. There's a lot of stuff to work with Austin Booker. I think it's a really fun landing spot for him. And that wraps up this Bears draft. So I am going to go with an A grade. I'm only giving out A pluses if I literally don't have a single negative thing to say about a team's draft. And taking that punter in the 4th round, I think there was different directions they could have gone. But the Bears will ultimately have one of my highest graded drafts here in this draft process. Love what they did over the weekend. Then we got the Detroit Lions, a very interesting draft, one of the more aggressive drafts you'll ever see, and that's not a huge surprise coming from Dan the Man Campbell. Mr. Go Forward on 4th down showed us last year they want to do whatever they want in the draft, and they took it to another level this year, going super aggressive. It is very worth noting that this draft came at the additional cost of their 3rd round pick that they traded up to get Terrion Arnold, their 3rd round pick next year that they gave up to come back into this draft for Giovanni Manu, and then they gave up their 4th round pick next year to come back to the back end of the 4th round for Sione Vaki. And we're not going to be analyzing every single little trade move throughout these draft grades, but when you're talking about massive draft capital like that on the move, it is certainly something you have to put into the picture of the Detroit Lions draft process. But let's go back down the board and talk about the players they got, what I think about each pick. So they come up 5 spots, again, giving up that 3rd round pick as well, a top 75 pick to come up for Terrion Arnold. Without the trade up, I think this is an A pick, right around the spot where he should have gone in the first round. Super physical corner. He fills a huge need for the Detroit Lions, gets to reunite with his teammate Brian Branch. So many reasons to love his fit with the Detroit Lions, right? I understand why they picked him as a guy that's like the perfect piece for that defense. You brought in Carlton Davis. He's got injury issues and probably not a forever option for you at corner. Beyond that, your outside cornerback room was a massive question mark. So really hard to argue with the player and the fit for the Lions. Just a minor ding because they did pay a hefty price to come up and get this player. I'm trying to provide some critiques where I think it is applicable throughout these videos so that we're not just going A grades down the entire board. There is a risk when you give up that extra draft capital, when you're so sure that this is the guy that you need. It doesn't always play out that way. I know the Lions kind of earned a lot of benefit of the doubt with what happened last year. I understand that. Lions fans are hyped about this. You're all in on your organization, but fans of other teams have had that same mentality, and picks like this don't always work out. And the other little note on him, it's not that I don't believe in Terrion Arnold and what he's going to be for the Lions, but he did not clear that 4.50 40 time that it just, man, speed really matters at this position. I think he fell in this draft to the 24th spot. You know, a lot of people saw him as a top 20 type of player. Falling to 24 was not a huge surprise for me because the hit rate on corners that run a worse 40 time than a 4.5 flat don't have the best first round hit rate. It's not that it's a, death sentence for a player, but you don't even have to, look outside of Detroit for the last time a corner was drafted high that didn't run that fast in Jeff Okudah, and the man-to-man skills just didn't translate all the way to the next level. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring that up as well. At the end of the day, though, I do think he's going to work out for Detroit. I think he's a very good football player. I understand why they made this move. We're going with an A- at the end of the day with just some minor critiques on the trade up. And then Ennis Rakestraw falls to them with the 29th pick in the second round. Just a very similar brand of corner. They went with the double dip strategy, which I like. I'm a big fan of the double dip strategy. For kind of the reasons we mentioned with Terrion Arnold, you don't always know, like you feel good about it. You think you know, but you don't always know if this is the guy. So double dipping increases the competition in that room. It's just an extra dart to throw on a good prospect like a Rakestraw. And if Carlton Davis leaves someday, you've got two of these guys potentially. That secondary was by far the biggest issue with the Detroit Lions roster, and they double dipped here. And Ennis Rakestraw, again, a corner that did not run faster than a 4.5, press man corner, physical dude, a kneecap biting corner that loves to hit. Both these guys are like neck and neck in terms of play style, size, scheme fit, you name it. And between the two of these guys, it's incredibly unlikely that they didn't fill that outside corner spot. Opposite of Carlton Davis in a season where they're looking to win a Super Bowl. But ultimately, you are taking your entire first and second round with that third round trade up to fill that one cornerback need. And then, again, you have some future flexibility in there as well. But then you get to day 3, and things get even more interesting for Detroit. A really unique pick here with the 26th pick in the 4th round for two specific reasons. Number one, you don't see a ton of teams taking, a 3rd round pick, a day 2 pick in next year's draft, and coming back into the draft for a late 4th round pick. That's a hefty price to get back into this draft for a player in Giovanni Manu, who he himself is a very unique player to analyze here. A player from overseas that has not played much football, a complete raw moldable ball of clay with insane physical traits. This is essentially the Jordan Mailata pick. But for the Eagles, that came with a 7th round pick that fell into their lap. This is a much heftier price. So there's a world where this is the next Jordan Mailata, right? And he's a franchise left tackle for the Detroit Lions. And if that world happens, there's going to be Lions fans that pull up this graphic in 2-3 years, whenever this might be, and just slap it in my face and be like, you didn't think this was a great pick, you freaking idiot. And I'll admit, there's a world where that happens. And I am super intrigued for Dan Campbell and this coaching staff that has done such a great job in terms of player development and finding the right types of humans for their culture. I don't even really hate this pick, but it is wildly aggressive to take a guy that, most teams seem to have thought, 6th, 7th round, hopefully a guy you might be able to stash on your practice squad. But, the more you think about it, you spent a 4th round pick on this guy. All of a sudden, if you put him on your practice squad, someone might sign him to the active roster where he's going to be making a lot more money. So you kind of have to roster him, and then he's a true project. Like 2-3 years before we even know how competitive he is, he'll be 25, 26 years old by that point. He's not 19 years old. He is 23. So I'm not going to question this I'm not going to go over the top to question this, because I do think this is an organization that's earned the benefit of the doubt. I do think this team will be good. You're hoping it's going to be a late 3rd round pick you're giving up for this player next year, not a early 3rd round pick. But you got to look at the downside of this as well, where he just kind of flames out as a forgotten player, and you're sitting there at the end of the 2nd day of the draft next year, and you're like, I kind of wish we had that 3rd round pick back. So very interesting process. I'm going to just say solid pick, very risky pick. This is like, those crazy 4th down, go for it decisions that Dan Campbell has out there. And then they kind of do it again. They take a 4th round pick next year and come back in for a really late 4th round pick this year and get Sione Vaki out of Utah. I think this is about where he was supposed to go. And it's not like he really fills a need for them either. They have plenty of these hybrid safety types. Vaki's a fun, playmaking, strong safety, but they have those guys on the roster. And then they also kind of announced him as a running back, but you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. Don't know how much he's going to be playing on running back. So if they just stayed put, took him at the end of the 4th round, I would say it's a really, kind of a great pick. Like, good value, fun player, totally fits their culture. But was it really a player you had to get in the building right now? I don't know. We'll find out, I guess. It was certainly risky, and they're going to be out their 3rd and 4th round picks next year there. Love what they did with the 6th round picks with some really good players falling to them. Mekhi Wingo, I did have as an early day 3 guy, a true 4th round grade, but they needed a little bit more juice in their pass rush. That was one thing that I looked back on their draft. I was like, edge or like a speedy interior rusher would be nice for them. And there you go. Mekhi Wingo is exactly that. I don't think he'll ever be a starter. We knew that when we broke him down as my 10th ranked defensive tackle in this draft, but just great get off, incredible first step. He's undersized, probably not going to be too much of a run defender unless you want to go with like a base odd front, put him as a 4 tech or a 5 tech dealing with a tackle out there. Or a shade of the tackle, kind of shooting gaps and doing that kind of stuff. But as a situational pass rusher where you can do stunts and loops and blitzes off of him, line him up in between a guard and a center or in between a guard and a tackle and just see if he can split that gap and cause some chaos in the backfield. There's a lot of fun stuff you can do with a player of this skill set. And in the 6th round to get an impactful role player, I think that's a great pick. And then you get Christian Mahogany at the end of the 6th round. I am going to say certified steal. If he went in the 3rd round, it would not have batted an eye. I think he's a potential starting guard in the league. He's got size, he's got athleticism, he's got toughness. Apparently fell in the draft because of injury issues. The Lions have told us throughout this offseason with guys like Carlton Davis and DJ Reader, Marcus Davenport, their overall aggressive strategy in general, no risk it, no biscuit. Injury issues, they don't care. Give me Christian Mahogany. He's too good of a football player to pass up in the 6th round. I can't even argue with it. If he can't stay healthy, who cares? It's a late 6th round pick. I think they might have a future starter here in the 6th round in Christian Mahogany. They got a couple of older guards in there. As early as next year, we might see Mahogany as their starting guard. So I love that for them. Ultimately, I'm going to go with an A- for the Lions. I think they got a really good haul, a bunch of good football players, somewhat similar to last year, where you look back on it and you can have some questions about the draft process and how they went about things. But you look back on it and you're like, they got a bunch of really good football players. And then Manu, we'll see what happens there. But I think from a value perspective, they did a much better job than my critiques ended up being last year. For the most part, I was dead ass wrong about the Lions draft last year, with the exception maybe of Jack Campbell. But very fun draft. Love it. Let's move on to the Green Bay Packers. A roller coaster per usual for the most part with Brian Gutekunst's drafts. But I do think the roller coaster came kind of in the middle of the draft, which you can live with when I think they knocked their first 3 picks out of the park. Jordan Morgan was just a tiny touch earlier than I think you're comfortable with him, but I think he would have come off the board maybe 3 or 4 picks later to teams like Baltimore, San Francisco. I think had their eye on him. But there's a guy like Graham Barton on the board who I think was a much better football player. Real first round talent and some of these other options as well. Maybe a guy like Cooper DeJean for that secondary. But I understand the need pick on Jordan Morgan. They don't know at left tackle if 2022 7th round pick Rasheed Walker can sustain the success he had last year as a quality starting tackle. But even Jordan Morgan, better movement skills, better potential, certainly in the run game, but as a pass protector as well. So I understand, getting that insurance at left tackle, but I also love the flexibility for Jordan Morgan to be a right guard for the Green Bay Packers, which is one of their biggest needs on the roster, where all you really have is Royce Newman, who's played before and is a complete turnstile every time he's out there, and Sean Ryan, who's a 3rd round pick in 2022. They're hoping to get leaps from him next year, but it just gives them complete flexibility to figure out the offensive line. This is their draft, or just their overall philosophy with the O-line. They love positional flexibility. Jordan Morgan totally fills that, and for them to kind of say, okay, we can head into day 2 now, feeling very safe about where the offensive line is at and the offense overall for Jordan Love, gave them some good peace of mind. It's not like it was some major reach. So I think it was a very solid pick for Jordan Morgan to the Green Bay Packers. I had a top 50 grade on him, which means, if he sneaks into the back end of the first round, that's fine, but probably more of an early round 2 type of talent. So just a teeny tiny bit early with some of those true first round grades still being there. Specifically in guys like Graham Barton and Cooper DeJean. But then you get to the 2nd round, filling their 2 biggest defensive needs there, Edgerrin Cooper and Javon Bullard. Really hard to argue with either of these picks. I gave them both an A for Edgerrin Cooper. Fills that LB2 need they have. He's an excellent blitzer, a ton of physical potential. Really probably the highest upside linebacker in this draft, but is going to need some time to learn and grow, which is why he wasn't a first round pick. But I do think for this type of talent, right around that 50th pick was where I would have started thinking about him. And that's what they get in him after they trade down for a couple of picks that they used to navigate day 3 for some guys that they liked, which is where some of that criticism's coming in later. But very good linebacker prospect, and you're hoping Quay can take that step up in year 3 to be more of the, commander of the defense, the Mike, wear the green dot, and Cooper can do what he does well, fly around, blow shit up in the backfield, blitz, you name it. And then Javon Bullard, love the value. You knew Brian Gutekunst had to walk out of this draft with another Georgia defensive player, and they got a damn good one and a huge need as their second safety after they signed Xavier McKinney. I think both these guys have the flexibility to rotate high, to rotate down in the box. They're going to be able to disguise stuff really well, but both these players can do a little bit of everything. Bullard is a young player. He's still developing some of the coverage technique. For example, one thing he does is he takes these really wide turns sometimes when he's covering a post or a deep crosser, and it's like, dude, stay on the guy. You got to stay tight. He's still improving in the terms of run defense as well, taking the right pursuit angles, tackling consistency. Neither are weaknesses for him, but neither are strengths. So, I don't think he's going to be a superstar right away, but I think in time definitely can be a quality starter for them, and a really fun safety duo there in Green Bay. had true second round grades on both those guys out of the SEC. So pretty on the nose for Green Bay. But then you get to the end of the third round. They take Marshawn Lloyd. I actually like this pick. You're talking about the end of the third round for a really talented running back. It's about where I thought Marshawn Lloyd should go. I had a late third, early fourth round grade on him, so here we are. You also look at the other running backs available. I had a couple guys higher than Lloyd, but with Josh Jacobs in-house on that long-term contract, I actually think Marshawn Lloyd was probably the best pick they could have made. The only other guy you probably could have thought about is Jalen Wright, where they're similar style players. I had identical grades on him. Lloyd's a little more experienced as a pass catcher, running routes out of the backfield and all that stuff, whereas Jalen Wright is a better pass protector, so a little bit of a trade-off there. But ultimately, I love how Marshawn Lloyd fits in with Josh Jacobs in that running back room. They didn't need a potential starter. That's why, Kamani Vidal or staying local with a guy, big bruiser like Braylon Allen. I get why they didn't go that route. They wanted that more complementary piece. If they want to mix in a little more wide zone stuff, you get a little bit more speed to the corner there. But especially, doing some screen work, some third down work. You're going to love having Marshawn Lloyd as obviously a backup, but more so just a complementary piece in that running back room. But this is where it starts to take a turn for me with this Packers draft. Taking Tyron Hopper, who I had a sixth round to a priority free agent grade. To me, I saw a backup linebacker and a special teamer, a smaller, slower linebacker with major tackling issues. Really a tough sell for me at the end of the third round. You already took a linebacker in the second. For me, there's wide receiver talent that could add some insurance to a young room. There's cornerback talent that can, add some insurance to a guy like Eric Stokes or a young player in Valentine. You could take another swing on a more talented safety that they clearly felt like they still needed. Taken 2 in the third round. Grab a better, more talented interior offensive lineman to add even more insurance, another position group they felt like they needed to address later. I really hate this pick. I hope I'm wrong and Hopper's a stud, but this to me was one of the worst picks that happened on day 2 of the draft. Brian Gutekunst seems to have 1 or 2 of these every year. Typically, when I criticize those picks, the analysis proves to be correct. Guys like Josiah DeGuara that I slammed the Packers for a couple years ago, Royce Newman, Sean Clifford. There's just, for some reason, Brian Gutekunst and the Green Bay Packers just completely go off the rails during the draft sometimes. And then, as of late, in recent drafts, they've kind of reeled it back in late. But it's usually in that third to fourth, maybe early fifth round range that we saw it again here with Tyron Hopper. And then I think again with Evan Williams. I hate both of these moves for Green Bay. So, I don't want to just stand here and be like, my evals are the best. I'm 100% right. I know everything. But for a little context here, I watched 22 safeties of all 22 this year. And Evan Williams was the last ranked safety I had. They passed on my number 1 ranked safety, or at least tied for my number 1 ranked safety in Malik Mustafa, who goes like 2 or 3 picks later to the hated San Francisco 49ers. So I think that's going to be a big thing you look back on at the early 4th round where these picks really still matter. Not only do they do that, but they trade up to take this player. Do not understand the process at all. I think it's completely out of pocket. You're talking about an undersized, slow safety who I think is just a special teamer in the league. So if these were late 5th, early 6th round picks, whatever, you're getting special teamers, guys like Hopper and Williams, but these are real picks. You can find starters. You can find superstars here in this part of the draft, and I think they completely botched it. So I'm going to slam them for that. I do think they got things back on track. They come up for an interior offensive lineman that they liked. Wasn't a guy on my radar, Jacob Monk. We had one of the all-time stream moments when this happened. We pulled up the highlight reel that I had on Graham Barton to see what we saw in Jacob Monk. We were watching the wrong player. Number 70 for Duke was playing center. I assumed that was him. And he looked horrible, so we were slamming number 70 for Duke completely out of pocket. Jacob Monk was either at guard or tackle in a lot of those clips, and we went back, we looked at Monk, looked like a good athlete, tested well. If they like him, I think it's a solid pick. Just wasn't a guy on my radar. Trading up for that guy, okay, like, is that really necessary? Did it have to be Jacob Monk? I don't know. But then you get Keaton Oladapo. Love this fit out of Oregon State. I think he's a matchup safety, someone you can bring in on dime packages. If you're going against a team that's got a challenging tight end that's really giving you trouble, you can put him in there. I think he's got instincts. He's got... I hate to use the Kyle Hamilton comparison because Hamilton just does these things on this elite level, and that's why he's so special. But if you're looking for that guy with the length and just a guy that presents problems in that short to intermediate part of the field in a hook zone or a curl flat where he's just got these instincts and this rangy length that just can get in the way of passing lanes, that sort of Spider-Man comp that I went with on Hamilton. That's the role for Oladapo. He's not going to be Kyle Hamilton. And very few, if any, players really will be. But as a fifth-round pick for a role player in the secondary, I like that fit. And then Travis Glover, fun pick, solid pick in my opinion. Fits the bill of that developmental day 3 project tackle. Came into the Senior Bowl day 2 out of Georgia State. Got the call up when someone got hurt and just went to work. Had a great second day of the Senior Bowl. Definitely looked the part getting that opportunity. Day 3 showed some more hiccups, so they've got work to do, but I think it was a good pick in terms of process, taking Travis Glover there in the 6th. But then one of my favorite picks they made, and certainly my favorite of day 3, Michael Pratt out of Tulane. I mean, for me, Pratt had a super high floor as a quality backup in the NFL and was the clear-cut, like, take this guy to be your backup quarterback. I saw him right in the mix with guys like Aiden O'Connell or Caleb, was it Haney or whoever went to the Saints last year in like the 4th round. I liked him more than Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who went like 4th round last year. We had this big like 4th round run on quarterbacks last year, and the Packers fetched after it and took Sean Clifford in a panic pick last year. Well, they make up for it this year, getting Pratt in the 7th. I even think Pratt has like kind of that Andy Dalton-esque potential to maybe be a starter someday. Probably not in Green Bay. You're feeling pretty good about what Love is, but if you're sitting here 3 years into his deal and he's got 3 or 4 starts under his belt because Love had to miss a game or 2, and teams like what you see, maybe this is the type of player that you flip for a 3rd round pick 3 years down the road. It's a very Green Bay thing to do. Big fan of that pick, but also just within this season where you have big expectations. Love might get a bum ankle, and you got to have a quarterback that can step in and give you a chance to win. I think Pratt can definitely do that on this team. And then they take Kalen King at the end of the 7th round. All right, it's fine. I understand. Like, I think he's a very polarizing player where he was in 1st round, way too early mock drafts heading into this year, and then he had one of the worst years of any cornerback in college football. Couldn't cover a nosebleed, ran in the 4.6s, goes to the Senior Bowl, looks like a variety of bad things I could call Kalen King that I'll just stay nice right now and avoid calling him those things. But you're betting on the sophomore year tape. He's a true junior out of Penn State. A lot of people watched that Penn State tape last year and were like, who's the other corner not named Joey Porter? Because he looks like a freaking stud. You probably ended up with another Kevin King here and Kalen King in Green Bay, but who knows, man? Maybe that guy from 2022 just magically makes a comeback. They saw similar returns doing process with like Jatavion Wicks, who had a similar sort of story last year. So maybe he's a hit. I do think it's interesting for Green Bay, just as a final note here. They really believe in their wide receiver room, and they really believe in that cornerback room. The wide receiver note is interesting because Christian Watson's been undergoing a lot of medical treatment for that hamstring. Matt LaFleur came out and said they feel good about it heading into next year, so they don't invest in any wide receivers. I think them passing on a guy like Troy Franklin at the end of the 3rd round, for example, they feel good about Watson's injury stuff. So it's encouraging for Packers fan, and it's even more encouraging that they feel as good as they do about that cornerback room. Eric Stokes coming off that injury. You don't want to just quit on Eric Stokes, right? Was a 1st round pick, a lot of talent, a young player coming out of Georgia, had an up and down rookie year, and then was hurt all of his 2nd year. So the fact that they feel good about him coming off the injury, that's encouraging for Packers fans and for Carrington Valentine, who is kind of an example of why I like these draft grades, because last year we pegged him as a 7th round pick that was a potential steal and a potential starter for them. And here he is heading into next year, like had a good rookie year, and they like him potentially as a third starter for them in that secondary. So some kind of good news from Green Bay. I think something that their draft told us about the Green Bay Packers, at least what they think internally about some of their guys. So at the end of the day for Green Bay, I'm going to go with the B- draft grade. I like a lot of the stuff they did early. Love the Pratt pick at the end. But I want to be critical where I can. While I think this is a solid draft and it's going to help their football team, that's the point of the draft, I think they wasted a lot of value. And there's a lot of criticisms to be had where I think they took a third-round pick and Tyron Hopper kind of showed their ass to the league and wasted it. You took a pair of day 3 picks, traded up for a really high 4th-round pick, and again, took a guy that I really think is just going to be a special teamer, probably not on the team in 3 years. So really hope I'm wrong in those evaluations, but I did spend the last 3 months watching film and came to those conclusions. I'm going to tell you about it if that's how I feel. So we'll see how that ages. But then we wrap up with the Minnesota Vikings, very quiet on the second day of the draft, but very active on the first day of the draft. They get J.J. McCarthy and Dallas Turner. My analysis of this, and we've already had the first round draft grades video, so I can probably speed this up a little bit, but I just love how they navigated the draft. They didn't overpay to go get JJ with that 5th pick, where it's like you're sunk into them. You've got all these picks invested in them. If they traded, 11 and 23, which they gave up 2 second-round picks to get that pick, and then you're probably giving up another pick to move up to 5. It's like, man, you're really dug in. He has to be the guy. He's got more pressure to play early on. He falls to you basically at 10. They move up a spot, whatever. Some very late picks. I'm fine with them making that little subtle move up so no one else does. But, I think it gives you obviously the flexibility to get Dallas Turner, which is a little more than flexibility. That's a luxury. But I think in terms of flexibility in the sense of like, okay, if Darnold's playing well, there's not as much pressure to put McCarthy in because, again, you didn't sink all those resources into him. McCarthy's going to have to earn this job a little bit more, which I think that competition is great. And then if for some reason he's a bust, it's a little bit more like the Josh Rosen deal where, all right, that's fine. We'll move on to the next guy. Not a perfect parallel there with Rosen, but there's just a difference between getting a quarterback at 10 and getting a quarterback at 5. Like, case in point, maybe Daniel Jones versus Justin Fields, right? It's just a little, that subtle difference in what you had to sink into a guy can go a long way in terms of, are you willing to move off the guy, or do you feel like he has to be your franchise quarterback? So maybe I spent too much time on that and I'm overthinking it, but I really think it matters personally. As far as McCarthy himself is concerned, I definitely think is a quarterback worth taking the risk with the 10th pick. Obviously, the sample size is small, but when he got to those big third downs, the play extension, how he was able to keep drives alive, I think really, especially as the season went on, you started to see, okay, there is a franchise quarterback in there. It's just a matter of kind of blowing up that balloon into, college game manager to NFL franchise quarterback. I think it's all in there. I think, he's young. He's got the great work ethic. I think it's a good risk. And man, is this a dream landing spot for a J.J. McCarthy, like elite of the elite wide receiver group, great coaching, great O-line. So if you're talking about putting a young quarterback in a situation where he has a good situation to be a hit and succeed, absolutely the case here with Minnesota, but still going to be very wait and see, I think. I don't want to call him a boomer bust prospect, but something in that light maybe. And then getting Dallas Turner at 17 is a very good pick, but very similar analysis to what we said about Terry and Arnold, where, you're getting a really good player who's going to fill a long-term need for them, not so much an immediate need, but an impactful position out of Alabama. You can totally see how he fits with Brian Flores' defense with it's not that coverage ability is his why you're drafting him, but in this specific scheme where they like to show blitz and drop random guys into coverage, like you can run Dallas Turner up the pole with a tight end if you want. So they got some extra flexibility there. You're obviously hoping that he can continue to develop his pass rushing skill set and give you that Danielle Hunter replacement long-term as a true number 1. But similar analysis where they gave up the 3rd and 4th round picks next year to come up 6 spots and get Dallas Turner. It's a hefty price to pay. It makes it so he really has to hit for it to be worth that. But then you got to fast forward to day 3. I like what they did, especially with Kyrie Jackson at the top of the 4th round. Definitely felt like one more cornerback in that room was going to go a long way. I think they have some interesting pieces. They invested in Mekhi Blackmon last year, who looked good in flashes. You got Byron Murphy, on a shorter-term veteran contract. Caleb Evans, I just don't think is a long-term starter for you. You got Andrew Booth hanging around, a high second-round pick from a couple of years if he could stay healthy. So just one more piece in that room as a high-upside 4th-round pick makes a ton of sense. That's exactly what Kyrie Jackson is. I thought Jackson would come off the board in the 3rd round. Doesn't last too long into the 4th here, but very much that lengthy press corner that Brian Flores wants in this system. It's what they're looking for. They haven't quite found that guy yet. I'm going to give him a chance to be that dude for them, and I think it's a really good spot now with a lot of high-end competition. Let the best man win. I'm a big fan of that as a team-building philosophy. And then you got to fast forward basically to the back end of the draft here. 6th round, they get another pick in Walter Rouse at the very top of the 6th round. Right on par for the value. I saw Walter Rouse as that sort of 6th man of the year type where he doesn't really have the athleticism to be a starter in the league, but I'm a big fan of having a guy that has tackle experience, but probably projects better as a guard. So, I don't really think he's going to win a starting guard job, but if someone gets hurt, I think he can step in and not get lost for you. I think it's a good pick. And then get Will Reichert. I'm fine taking kickers at the end of the 6th round, and Will Reichert, I don't write up kickers and punters myself, but definitely someone that was on my radar, the all-time college football record holder for points in a career. From what I have seen on live TV, watching obviously plenty of Alabama games, seems like a damn good kicker. So very good pick at the end of the 6th after they lost their kicker to the Packers, Greg Joseph, heading down the Mississippi there. But in the 7th round, a couple guys I didn't get to, Michael Juergens and Levi Drake Rodriguez, interior O-line. Is this Cam Juergens' brother, Vikings fans or Wake Forest fans? I assume it is an interior offensive lineman there. I couldn't get an answer on that, but makes sense as a depth pick. And then Levi Drake Rodriguez out of Texas A&M Commerce. I apologize, I didn't have a lot of Texas A&M Commerce tape sitting around, so I didn't get to him. We'll just have to be kind of wait and see, but we'll just go solid picks on those in the 7th round, as I don't really have any criticisms of the process there. So at the end of the day for the Vikings, I think Kyrie Jackson has potential in the 3rd round, but this is going to be all about mostly J.J. McCarthy, and then, of course, Dallas Turner as well, where they pumped a lot of resources into those 2 players. They're hoping, these can be the building blocks of both sides of the ball for them well into the future. So I do think the process is sound. I'm going to give it an A-. But this one is one we're going to be able to very easily know 3 years from now how this draft grade is going to play out, because it really just comes down to those 2 players at the top. So that's going to do it. You guys let me know in the comments down below where you think I'm right, where you think I'm wrong, what you think I missed. What do you think of the grades? Excited to interact with you guys in the comments. Please do hit that like button while you're down there. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys for the next division. Peace out.